Kani adaya me. How are you? How are all you doing? Good? It's good. Everybody's good in home?
Yes.
Good. You're doing good? Yes. And children? Good.
50%.
50%? Okay, good.
Happy to be here.
Okay, good. And you're doing good? Good.
Happy to be here.
Good. How are you doing? Good? Yeah, that's good. Okay, good.
Very happy.
Good.
Several people from BFF couldn't make it because some sickness.
Yeah.
Nothing heavy, but didn't want to take any chances.
Yeah. Now we're getting to winter. Okay. So today topic Shantideva's sixth chapter called patient. So we have to be patient. Patient. Okay. I think is Shantideva's this text, particularly the 6th and the 7th chapter and 8th chapter. I feel like a 6th chapter is specifically our human problem, one of the, reaction, aggression, anger, and a kind of specifically targeting that. And 7th chapter much more in general, how the affliction can be kind of like how we need to kind of acknowledge and really trying to pay attention our general deception of our afflictions as 7th chapter. And 8th chapter really then this 8th chapter, how ideally how we should live our life is cherishing another living being. So I think how we can kind of ideally to live life more, not fearful way, more kind, much more. So 8th chapter is so much focus into cherishing another living being, how we can become not too scary, but more cherishing another living being, and less kind of investing into the cherishing of a self. I think it is then fundamentally it's kind of, I think the ideally practice is kind of pushing into some kind of like a unconditional way of cherishing. Unconditional, because we like to cherish, kind of when generally we human are, when we are kind of very open space, we like to help. We want to. Today when we're driving up, there's one deer. This deer crossed on another lane, and now he's waiting in that lane, and he's trying to. I don't know. It's what to do, and then we stop, and then maybe we create more chaos, or the deer was just standing there and kind of like trying to cross. It's kind of. I think all people are looks like more pay attentioning, kind of. So generally, we really like to cherish, to help, but sometimes in our mind we have lots of kind of like generally, like conditional. Little bit there's a condition, things happens, and I think this is not necessarily negative, I think, but something that we need to not becoming barrier, but somehow we can cross. And 8th chapter is basically how we can cherish something unconditionally and genuinely, with the patience, with the understanding, with a kind of like the proposal in the 8th chapter is so beautiful. If we see some people unconditionally cherishing some living being, it's so beautiful. It's like it is a precious, and It's kind of like a source of inspiration. So that's kind of like the way the 8th chapter, this whole kind of like a way where it's trying to go, where it's trying to lead, this whole practice, where it's trying to lead. It's just trying to lead us into the kind of comfort spiritual path, or it is trying to push our limit. We as a human being, are we capable to give unconditional cherishing? So this is what is beauty of these texts is, it's not just kind of like a one simple guideline, but it really prepares, like even when you move back like a chapter 5 and chapter 4, chapter 4, like kind of like a mindfulness, somehow to build up awareness. Although, of course, we have kind of strong habit is quite strong, but regardless, trying to developing some kind of like a strength of awareness within our actions of our body, speech, and mind. And the 5th chapter, Shishin, and then, of course, how to sustaining or to able to maintain something, that kind of like a strength of our awareness. 5th chapter gives. And then it's 6th chapter slowly is trying to talk in a chapter into the patient. Important for us, how we're going to develop patience. We cannot go just straight forward into the patient. I think it's very important. First, some level of a mindfulness practice, and some level of a practice of introspection, shishin, tempa and shishin. Fundamentally, something that's kind of habit kind of naturally kicks in, but intentionally able to kind of regulate, intentionally able to kind of look at into our actions. So that kind of like due to the meditation, due to the practice, so able to look at that. So today, in a practice of Kawa tongdo sawa yi jinda deshi chola so leche kanyi te kwenkyang kongru jiki jombarchi shedan tabi dibame soba tabi kadume tewe sola nenendu nasu suki gombarchi es. Kawa tongdo sawa yi jinda deshi chola so leche kanyi te kwenkyang kongru jiki jombarchi. And in Shantideva's this teaching, first thing is zero tolerance for anger. Basically anger from the virtue karmic point of view, anger really kind of paralyzed all the merit that we accumulated from the eons and past and present, entire, just kind of like that kind of like an explosion, that kind of like a heart feeling kind of paralyzed the karmic seeds, the karma that you accumulated through practice of generosity and offerings and anything that virtue activity that we have done in our life, we kind of that anger, that heart, that explosion, that aggression, somehow the word it says is kind of destroyer. Basically, karmic seeds is paralyzed. It's kind of like a kind of burns. Analogy for anger is like a wildfire. Analogy for craving is like olive oil onto the paper. It's kind of like a slowly it goes and it really grabs very strong. Anger is like a wildfire and kind of like it burns and kind of destroys. So, now usually what happens is that makes very, 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 very small room for us. That's really kind of like so usually kind of trying to see this first verse is kind of in 2 layers. The first layer is not just that kind of like losing temper. Losing temper is not necessary, like not necessarily, losing temper not necessarily can happen same effect. What first verse, what it's saying, it can paralyze entire virtue, karmic seeds that you accumulated from. It's not necessarily temper, losing temper. But here the anger, which is more than just losing temper, it's have some of a almost hatred feeling. Okay, so anger with a hate feeling, that kind of that anger, not just kind of like a self-frustrated, but there is a object and there is there's a feeling of want to hurt. There's a feeling of a revenge. There's a feeling of something that wants to damage. That feeling and that experience itself, actually, in a reality, it's not damaging the another living beings, but while we're experiencing that damaging, wants to damage something that kind of feeling, actually it is a damaging our own virtue. Even scientifically, it damages our, like when we have negative emotions, very strong anger, it damages our immune systems, it's damaging our physical health, it damaging is our. So we can take the Shantideva's verse, the first verse, even more further. For example, you've been a very, very mindful and eating very healthy food, or eating this all kind of what you call the gluten-free or green food, these whole things. You went kind of peaceful for 1 week and you are very in fit, and 1 week later you have this kind of a rage, this kind of an explosion, and exactly all the 1 week of that kind of accumulated kind of health immune system, the healthy immune system, at that morning when you have an explosion happen, yes, it will damage that immune system. The healthy immune system may get damaged by that rage feeling. And from the health-wise, okay, it's damaged our immune system. From the merit-wise, it's damaged its karmic seeds. So I think that anger have an effect, not, Shantideva was saying it will damage eons merit accumulations. I think we can look at through the physically, kind of looking into how much it can damage our immune system, how much it damage our emotional health, how much it damage our health, mental health, how much it will damage our, if we have done some meditation practice, it kind of ruins everything. So it's have a kind of, we can trace back, that kind of gawa tongdo sawa jinda deshi chola so leje kain te kunya kongru chigi jombarches, one instance of anger or hatred feeling. So now maybe we need to look at it anger is some kind of barrier to opening up to understanding. One thing I think that why it becomes so, the experience of anger kind of close up. And it really closed the door to awareness, to understand. Even something that you really disagree, but if we have open up our awareness where that is coming from, I think the anger, it won't become, you might have a feeling of some kind of discomfort or feeling of a rage, but I think it won't become like a closing up, kind of discriminating and separating, isolating. So over here, Shantideva is not necessarily saying that I think Shantideva is mentioning this kind of like an anger that's really close up, it's really even not think about to opening up our awareness to understanding. It's just kind of like just concentrate into that specific narrow action or position, and boom, pretty much justifying anger. The justified anger and hatred is a really, really dangerous, because once it's justified, it becomes kind of like stabilizing. It is a normalizing. It is a trying to kind of go through. It's kind of like it's just kind of like anger is very very interesting human emotion, I think. Sometimes I feel like when we say anger is basically we as an individual person karmically when we are in a corner. It's not somebody's cornering us, but our own karma, our own, somehow we are into that corner. And then there's a rage and hatred for the universe. Sometimes, and then the anger really wants to have something to blame, wants to have something to. I think, I mean, like the anger wants to blame. It looks like anger wants to blame, but I think as a human being, we are looking for some kind of breathe, some way to kind of hold. And somehow there's an object to blame. It gives you a little bit kind of like a less confusing, anger, a little bit confusing. You have some kind of directions. And somehow the behavior of anger is, in a karmically, in a karmic point of view, you are kind of in the corner. Somehow you reacted. And then when there's nobody to blame, it becomes kind of very open. It makes totally confusing anger. And usually to kind of grounding our human behavior, we want to have something to point the finger. Okay? And that finger pointing is just to kind of like, in a way, it is the anger itself becomes less confusing. In a way, it becomes kind of like a stabilizing. Okay, so why we do that? I think we have to look at it, the behavior of those emotions. And then once what happened over here, the pointing, the blaming, is the way to justifying. Usually we are not able to justify it because it's just kind of open, kind of frustration, because of our own self is a karmically cornered. What that means, karmically cornered? Karmically cornered, what I feel is something that's like we as a human being, we need to nurture it. If we have a lack of a nurtured while we're growing up, if we have a less this kind of like a nurturing, affectionated environment, and then we see somehow we kind of fall into that kind of like everything becomes kind of like a suspicion, and everything becomes kind of uncertainty, and that kind of like I think particularly in a subconscious level, if we grow that kind of a fear and that kind of things and builds up, and somehow these conscious and subconscious action puts us into a karmically cornered. Basically, what basically that means, even the small things not going well, is, something that usually, oh yeah, okay, I need to do. Somehow we becomes blind spot into the common sense, and lots of get caught into the emotion. Okay, lots of things get caught into the emotion. So then it's kind of like that kind of, finding some way to point a finger, then through that, and then justifying, then through that, basically, once it's justified, basically, you give in kind of like you're pretty much honoring that feeling, and you kind of like and that is the kind of like I think here, the minute it happens, it will kill our physical immune systems and the spiritual immune systems. That's I think the Shantideva what is really trying to. It's not necessarily generally something that sometimes you have somebody losing your temper. Is this something coming from? We as this living being need to have a grown up into a nurturing and a loving environment. But when there's this kind of liking of these kind of like a condition, and then sometime. But one thing is interesting part of the anger is it is a kind of what you call like it manifests very strong and grounded and looks like unshakable. But even like these kind of things is justified. Yeah, that's right. Almost. Even that kind of like a rage and anger, what's really happening in there is something permanent, something absolute. Fundamentally, the main kind of like a concreting that emotion is there is in a conscious and subconscious view of something's very solid and something's really kind of like a truly existence. So I remember one time I was in Nepal. There's some issue happened, and I have a little bit losing my temper, and then I was meditating. I was no, that's absolutely not right. I'm trying to making. I'm really kind of like zeroing down my. And is not getting good. It's disrupting my sessions. But the interesting part, so I have one really rough session, is kind of interrupted with all those things. And then after my session finished, I went to do a circumambulate to the temple. And I was doing a circum, and then suddenly there's an earthquake happened. The earthquake happened, and of course, I can hear the valley, everybody kind of like crying, kind of, and that's that kind of like a earthquake and that shaking and that kind of like a uncertain and this kind of grounded, solid, this kind of like a shaking and impermanent and any so. Boom, everything's gone. My feeling of that kind of like a rage and all the anger is like a fully gone. Just simply experience that earthquake, and the next day I went to see that person and I just offer him some good things. It's not that distraction, but it's just kind of like a awareness of reality. We're all into kind of like a same boat. We're all in the nature of impermanent. We're all into that kind of like a temporary reality. And then, like trying to make something permanent reality, trying to project and trying to making all kind of story. And then, that earthquake, boom, 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 that's brought me down to ground. Everybody, we are all in the temporary reality, all the nonsense of a permanent projection of reality dissolved, kind of very simple way. So we are in West Coast, maybe possibility of earthquake. and dissolve entire our afflictions. Okay. So now, how we deal, how we work with our own anger. Repressing our anger is absolutely not. The basically. What kind of, basically, I think one thing important part is what kind of environment that kind of emotion flourish. That's, I think, is really important. First we have to try to avoid that environment where it can nurture the anger. Okay, so when that environment is not necessarily external environment, is much more look at our own internal environment. Okay, so when we say internal environment, we need to kind of avoid which can flourish anger and hatred. So what kind of internal environment? If we are feeding for our own psychic mind, if we are feeding into our own mind fear, if we are feeding to our own mind something is a negative story, that is the perfect environment where the anger flourish. So now this is kind of like a now within our own environment. Now when I say like fear can have a kind of two layers: general fear of uncertainty of a universe and so on and so forth, but the fear related with the personal things. And again, if we overfeed the fear of self-fear, what that really means, self-fear of uncertainty of everything you gain, everything that you had. If we have overly emphasized, it can be destructive. It can be this and that. That kind of like a fear nature, if we do too much, I think this can becomes, kind of like a gathering in environment where the anger and hatred. Anger can kind of like a go. So what's really important part is basically internally how we. It doesn't mean that everything what we have is impermanent. That kind of awareness is important. Impermanent awareness with a strong attachment what we have, it becomes internal contradiction. So awareness of impermanent, internally or externally, what we have, usually the rebellion from internally can happen to awareness of impermanent by the attachment. Okay, so I think that what is the most important part over here is attachment do have a playing important role for anger explosion. Attachment do it seems like a two different human emotion, but attachment does play a very important role to. Okay, so fundamentally what I'm saying over here is how we deal with the anger, how we work with the anger is one area is attachment element. Even sometimes we might think, I don't know what I want. Is a confused attachment. It don't know what it wants, but it wants something. It's not getting something. And it may not necessarily know what it wants, but at the same time, somehow there is this kind of pull, there's a strong pull, so that creates chain reaction of aggression. Okay, so basically, working with the anger, I think one thing is this kind of like a conscious or subconscious pull, something we are clinging into it. we need to kind of genuinely and sincerely looking into that pull. What you're pulling. That's pull. That pull, we need to look at it. And we need to kind of like gradually, it's not necessarily repressed and ignored, but need to gradually kind of notice that. It's not my nature, it's not my intrinsic nature, but there is a condition that I'm kind of feeding. Somehow it brought me into this kind of state of existence. So it is basically flicks, I say. Sometimes your car is broke and you go to the place, the mechanic says, yeah, it can fix. You feel something relief. Yeah, it can fix. And same thing for human, for us. We have to see our own self. Things can be fixed. I think that's is a really, really, yes, it is not working. Yes, things falling apart, but things can be fixed. Things can be put together. Things can be put together. Things can put together. Basically, it doesn't require us, I think, doing so many kind of like great things, but even simple things that pay attention, behavior of our awareness, emotions, and then 2 days later or 1 day later, you can really see, like at the 2 days before, you almost like, this is who I am. You're almost defining that state of existence. And then slowly you put that awareness and you kind of like, hey, and then gradually kind of like having that space, then you can be different tomorrow, that different tomorrow. In a simple fix. For our human emotion is bringing the space between the self and the afflictions. Just creating that space can already heal that heavy, that kind of like inner kind of buzzing, that's kind of discomfort, can simply heal, creating that space. So therefore, it don't have to be, something like realization of emptiness, or what happened for me is that earthquake. It doesn't have to happen that. I think simply that's, like for example, if the day before you are really struggling with that craving and clinging and that things, and making stories and making all kinds of kind of like visualizations, but then if that's happening yesterday, but today, if you kind of make it that space and relaxed and just think, simple adjustment for emotions, for our internal, it doesn't look like a too complicated, simple adjustment. Sometimes we have today's, what you call that, people, not chiropractic, but sometimes one time I went by one student, I said, I'm not feeling back here, but that student just simple doing, he didn't do too much. I don't know what the name is. Something like, it is something simple, but then it helped it. I think similarly with our human, with the anger and all these things, it looks like a very, very kind of like a permanent emotional state. But afflictions are, I think, like a simple shift just opens up the healing process. Different person yourself, you can be surprised. Why I'm yesterday like that? Today, the demand of affliction yesterday doesn't matter today. It's just simply having that space and able to see, noticing, and then you are not feeding it. Basically, you stop feeding. You stop feeding. So fundamentally over here, how we deal with the anger, stop feeding the anger. Simple as that. Just stop feeding the anger. We don't need to, if we make it complicated with impermanent and so on and so forth, these are the kind of long-term sustaining that kind of state of awareness. But in a simple way, basically stop feeding. How I stop feeding the anger? Basically don't invest our thoughts. How is not possible? It's keep getting, it just kind of naturally pops up. Find one healthy distraction. And for example, breathing meditation. Breathing meditation, traditionally, breathing meditation is a virtue distraction from the non-virtue mind. It's just creating that transition. Your mind is so distracted with the non-virtue stuff. And breathing exercise is basically some kind of virtue or neutral distraction. You just created that, just to distract it, that mind to just hear. And that kind of that distraction creates kind of a space from that kind of non-virtue feeding process. It just basically took it out that kind of feeding process and paused feeding towards to our afflictions. So basically, breathing meditation is a way to pause. Just pause, take a walk, take a deep breath. Just intentionally tell our own self, I need to stop. I need to little bit give a break. Not necessarily telling I'm a bad. Sometimes what we do when we're trying to pay attention, then we're trying to, not telling to pause, we're telling I'm a bad person. Even you throw more down, you're trying to bring another negative feeling. So I think in a way, I feel like it is anger is very very changeable, can be changed, change. It can be fixed. It can be fixed without taking too long time. And simple discipline is pause. Pause to feeding that anger. Pause. Pausing. So it's almost like fundamentally, like for example, I heard like there's lots of emphasis related with the health. How you say, fasting. Fasting is non-fast and continuously feeding. It becomes the most problem of a health. So fasting becomes a very, very important part of even the health of our physical. In the same way, we have to have an emotional fasting and a conscious psychological fasting. What that really means, we need to look at it. Stop the feeding. Stop feeding the junk stuff, basically. So we need to apply same kind of logic and reason and cause and effect reality. Some way sometimes we buy things and it have so many things, what is there, like how many sugar, and then, so anyway, when I say like maybe for health, for physical, this kind of like a fasting may require quite long term to really to to feel the different for physical. For psychic or for emotion, one day fasting, one day nyungne of attachment, or one day fasting, we can feel different. We can be surprised. I'm so different. I thought yesterday that's who I am. But just simply one day, what is usually 16-hour or 18-hour fasting, whatever that is, even just emotional fasting. Basically not feeding that negative food. And I think this is I think we need to approach something like that. I need to physical fasting, and I need to emotional fasting. I need to fast something that I am, basically, when I say fasting, you have to know you are feeding something unbalanced or unhealthy. Unbalanced and unhealthy. Okay. Now, unhealthy part for fasting become very clear. Unbalance, that is a little bit more complicated. Like, for example, balance where awareness is, that's, I think, it takes to next level. Everything comes, at the end of the day, it comes down to the balance. Even, maybe you can stop feeding the anger, but then you may think into the obsessed thinking into something virtue, something merit accumulation, or maybe even a concentration. I want to do mindfulness. And you can take out from something and you apply your habit into the something different, and you justify as a virtue, and it becomes an obsess. Unbalanced. Okay? Unbalanced. So it's a very, I think, that for us, the unhealthy, the unbalanced part is a more long-term journey. But unhealthy part, trying to kind of like fasting, is quite, is not necessarily, it's like to make it, to see the benefit doesn't require kind of a long term. Okay, so basically, in a way, I think we need to, basically, we as a human being, we deserve to have a chance to pause, to fast. We also like, I deserve to have a healthy body. I deserve to have a healthy mind. I deserve. We need to tell for our own self, I deserve, and this is my right. I deserve. And I can. Particularly for the afflictions, for the angers, and anything like attachment or anything, it is a very interesting. It is a kind of like a, the salesperson, whoever they're selling for you, the marketing for the affliction, the fear, they're very skillful, I think. First of all, I think the problem comes from the who buy, consumer consumes, okay. So over here is kind of interesting, our own human self-cherishing. Self-cherish, I trying to, kind of doing something, you're feeling something you want to cherish, something you want to do good things for yourself. That's really good. That's really good. We need it. But what happens is, based on this kind of like a self-benefit or and there's this kind of mind just kind of like get into kind of like almost like a justifying, as like earlier mentioned, in a general justifying through our own self-cherishing mind. And then what it takes is, all this, basically, then there's different department. Self-cherishing is kind of like the main kind of like the foundation, and the clinging department, anger department. There's different departments who's trying to kind of promote for us to, this will be good for you. This is, they have a really, and fundamentally, if there is a no, who fund, if there's a no, the benefactor or the funding created by self-cherishing towards to the, clinging and attachment and anger, basically. So that's, so one thing is, I think, important part is long-term solution is not so much, dealing with the specific these issues, but somehow as an existence, as a self, how we can make a healthy. Okay, how we can have something as an existence. There's a lot of different tendencies there, but yes, but not dealing with each this different tendency, but how we can improve and strengthen me as a human being, as a person. I think that's also like not all the time you are depending into the fasting, but you need to be as a person, as a healthy. Fasting is a just temporary solution. It's not way to live, I think. It is a temporary solution. So in overall, as a physically, we have to be healthy. Fasting is a method to how to become healthy. One of the method to healthy. Overall, you have to feed healthy things. Overall, through these methods, basically overall, there's a sense of physically kind of being healthy, all balance element, and as a human, as a person, having kind of like a awareness and self, what will be the healthy? How we have a healthy sense of self. In a society, we're trying to create education, we're trying to do many different things. But healthy sense of self is how we create healthy sense of self. So I feel in our own daily basis, I think we have to have something. Step number one, very, very reduced afflicted state of a mind. That's, I think, the one fundamental state. You need to plan for that. It doesn't just fall down into your day. For example, Monday, tomorrow, if you want to have a really kind of like a less afflicted state of 12 hour or 9 hour, whatever we're going to tell it, I think we have to put the intention. We have to put the intention. How we prepare for that kind of perfect day. How we it requires awareness, it requires motivation. So, basically motivation plays a very important role. That motivation, what happens is the motivation really kind of strengthens the mindfulness of how we're going to hold our own self tomorrow. Okay, so basically, a healthy sense of self is basically it requires a certain level of a rejoicing for yourself. The more that we have some kind of rejoice for our own existence, not, usually problem is not rejoicing all the time, judging. We end up the day we judge our own self. Oh, so bad. It's so negative. Instead of end of the day judging our own self, we have to have something rejoicing for end of the day. To having end of the day to rejoice our own self, we have to have the day start with a not kind of feeling of a scare, but mindfulness with a compassion. There's a sense of engaging, proactive, but not with the fear. And that's require really good motivation. Okay? Strong motivation creates positive motivation, really helps to clarify all the fear. Usually we don't transform our motivation and only kind of part of our human evolution, part of our habit, we kind of constantly staying in mode of a fear. And of course, when we come fear, there is a paranoia, and the day will not be going to be rejoicable day, even though we know it's not kind of like a sustainability of a lifestyle. So again, here, I think what I'm saying over here is fundamentally not just kind of dealing with a specific condition and habit, but overall sense of self need to feel healthy and grounded. And for that, what I'm saying is we have to have a lot of rejoice for our own self. Rejoice is not so much that you complete it so much into the day. You don't necessarily have to complete it so many things a day. You can complete one gardening, one flower, even just gardening one flower, but you carry entire the day with some kind of like a loving kindness. Loving kindness, again, sometimes the word is too specific. Basically, what I'm saying is not intentionally pausing, somehow naturally pausing. let me put it this way, not intentionally fasting, but naturally fasting. Intentionally fasting, that becomes, like you meditate and you breathing exercise and so on and so forth. That's like the intentionally fasting of your own afflictions. Natural fasting is very important for overall becoming as a self, as a healthy. Natural fast. When I say natural fasting, what that means is basically somehow you're not just less restless. Natural, I say. so, so, so natural. Basically, that means your mind is a kind of the natural fasting means your mind is seeing all the object of attachment and anger and everything, but your mind is not trying to go into that department, that showroom, and trying to work with that. You see all these things. You observe. You see. You can have some level of a movement, of a feeling, but yes, that's it. That's, I would say, natural fasting. Intentional fasting is you saw all those things, you went inside, you're starting to buy, and then you're frustrated, and all that. Then you require intentional fasting. So what I'm saying is in the long term, that kind of like a natural fasting, state of awareness, somehow not necessarily pushing intentionally, putting mindfulness, without that kind of course, is a slowly development, but once you have that level of a state of mind, I think sense of self, your own existence, becomes very healthy. It's not all the time you have to go and fix. And that's, I think, the way we want to, this short life, where we want to be into that. Okay, so now the literally saying one instant of anger will going to destroy eons of merit, but I think we need to take this verse and saying one instant of anger will destroy our health immune system of a 1 month workout. That would be fear. Oh my God, that's 1 year in the marriage. Maybe it's okay, but when you say all the yoga that you did, all the gluten-free diet that you take, the minute you have one instance of anger, all gone. Then you feel like, oh my God, that's not. I cannot afford that. Naturally, So. But anger is so anger is our human emotional energy, and we label anger, and it have its own flavor. It cross destruction for our personal life. Even in some case, these so-called anger have create First World War, Second World War, possibility of another war, still going on, huge war. Basically, it's not the human hand. If we trace back where it's coming from, is this kind of human emotion, so-called anger and hatred. That's the way to kind of like a point. So, now one another element. So human energetic and attachment and clinging, these all are basically one have a push element, one have a pull element, but the human emotional energy which have a push element we call anger, which have a pull element we call attachment or clinging. So some kind of like a based on its own behavior, whatever the evolved, And this kind of push and pull, I think we as in human journey, for a certain extent, I think we might need that energy. And this energy coming from awareness, threats or needs, survivals, and this is, I think, generally as good. So what happens is that when it gets so detailed, when it becomes so narrow, when it becomes so specific, when it becomes so self-centered, now these energy, push and pull, they become much more destructive rather than constructive. I think we are not looking for this human energy, emotional energy, push and pull something, take it out. Maybe in the Bodhisattva, I think somehow majority of the energy of emotion is invest into the inviting and pulling in. Somehow, so I think, generally, I think we need to see as what's really what is the evolution of a human as a, push and pull, this kind of like a feeling is a survival, it is a protection, it's a kind of that thing basically. And once it becomes much more extreme, okay, or one way, once we're not able to regulate very well as a growing up, if we're not able to regulate, if we're not able to have a good direction, if we don't have a way to regulate that energy, awareness becomes very important, mindfulness becomes very important. And if we kind of like take this powerful, powerful, engine, if it have a very good direction and regulated, it can accomplish many different things. In the same way, basically, it needs to have a structure. It is require rhythm. It require direction. It require purpose. So I think sometimes, in a lots of time, kind of like a universal anger. Sometimes. So I tell one of my friends, you have a universal anger. It's not specific, you don't know but universal anger. It's the anger to the planet. One way to our human emotional energy, push and pull this energy to regulating is finding purpose. We have to find our own purpose. Once we find our purpose, we will invest that emotion, push and pull, that energy into that direction. Somehow we have to find purpose. What is the purpose? You have to, even for short term, we need to establish some kind of purpose, just to give us some exercise, some kind of like a glimpse of a taste of regulating this energy of a push and pull. So basically, once we, like a spiritual practice, retreat, meditation process, daily commitment, all that thing, is it giving some level of regulation for that energy, push and pull. Okay. So ideally, we need to find purpose of life. Okay, something that you feel, and the purpose of life is maybe something you don't like to do, but that is your purpose of life. Is purpose of life doesn't fall into our life, something that I really like to do it. And purpose of life comes into different manifesting due to different karmic cause and condition. So I think, I think even also if we ask how I can prepare to finding my purpose of life, I think what kind of exercise we have to do it, I will say regulate that energy, push and pull energy. Put into something. then it will kind of bounce back and forth naturally. It will show you your own karmic tendency. If we just wait and non-engaging and not regulating this human hour energy, and then you have this kind of like a universal anger and hatred, and nothing happened. My purpose of life didn't fall into my lap. Nobody showed me, and there's all kind of like a nonsense. It's kind of like a wild anger. Okay, so therefore. It's so fundamentally here, I think we have as a human being, we have a brain capacity or memory capacity, and that kind of like a very powerful. And then based on that, if we carry regulating this energy, push and pull energy, and they become really source of a practice of a patient. Maybe the push energy may become source of a developing patient. Usually push energy becomes a source of anger and hatred. If we regulate it very well, if we kind of direct very well, that push energy becomes a source of a practice of a patient. Usually supposed to create aggression, but it's simply changing and implementing some kind of a healthy regulation. Am I saying I'm kind of weird? It's okay to say regulation? What do you mean? I mean, regulation means basically, it looks like a legal term, but is it a legal term? Regulation? Yeah, maybe some kind of discipline. And discipline seems like a little bit kind of imposed. Maybe a little bit imposed, yes, and slowly somehow you're able to accept. There's all element is there. So balance. Balance seems like a little bit more passive. I like to have a little bit more kind of like proactive. Proactive. So fundamentally, like for example, even when you wake up morning, of course, to be very balanced wake up or very encouraging way of a wake up, we have to sleep very well, isn't it? So even something that's kind of like the minute we open our eye, you're already frustrated or want to go back to sleep. So anyway, my key point is over here is I think it's not that difficult. Making a cup of tea can be difficult if we make our mind making much more difficult. Oh, I have to get up. Oh, I have to take this. Oh, I have to do. If you add so much, oh, I have to do this. Oh, I have to do. Yeah, a cup of tea can become very difficult. But in same way, I think afflictions are almost like something that stays there, and they're kind of like but I think in a simple shift, not just fasting, even fasting for a few moments. I'm not talking about the fasting, for physical fasting, or only they say like after 16 hours or for a couple of days, then you can have a change. For afflictions, particularly in anger, I think even a couple hours of a fasting. And I think some people come out from therapy session or counseling session, and basically it gives some kind of glimpse of a fasting. People feel, I feel much better. Some people, when they express something, when they're trying to express, they basically kind of mind, instead of a feeding, mind went in the presentation mode. And just instead of feeding, it's just a presentation mode. It somehow gives glimpse of a fasting for that and somehow you feel light. So in a way, I think it's more easier than physical. And in a jump start. But then then it takes a kind of like a then it's in a long term it's of course it can take a more longer journey. So that's I think okay. Kawa tondo saba ye jinda de si chola so leje kai te gunya kondu tsuki jimba shedan de di bome soba to ka to me tewe sola ne na su su yikomba ches. So fundamentally Shantideva over here, second verse, he's trying to tell us he's saying, so therefore the practice of a patience becomes crucial in spiritual path. Practice of a patient becomes crucial path. And tewe sola nendento natsusu yukombachi. Basically, the second verse basically advising from many different angles. You have to prioritize. You have to look at from many different angles. Practice of a patient becomes very, very crucial because the another option is so danger. Another is the rage and anger, and these are like extremely harmful. Extremely harmful. So here, Shantideva's, from many different angles, many different perspectives, trying to engage in the practice of a patient. Okay, so what really means a patient over here? Usually, 동행 당랭기 써봐, 출랑 예승기 써봐. 뉴질라 재민이 써봐서. Okay, so now basically, practice of a patient was given through three aspects. Let me put it this way: in three aspects. Commonly, how we understood the patient is basically, if I say, patient is over here, I think, like it's not about restraining. Not so much about the restraining. Even the three type of a patient. Patient, that is commonly what we say, if somebody is being angered, then you're trying to be a patient. Patient, which is a kind of counter response of the anger, that type of a patient. There's that type of a patient through understanding, and that type of a patient through restraining. Through restraining is the not so healthy way. That kind of patient through understanding. What that really means. Basically, if somebody is losing and becoming outraged, you look beyond that action. You look this person beyond the action. What that really means is that you're trying to see this person's way, you're almost having this kind of awareness. It's not that person is doing something is behind the life, the way it grow, there's something more understanding background of that person, not just focusing into that specific action. That awareness becomes patient with awareness. And that patient is not restraining. Is when we don't have awareness, then we have only option left is a restraining. And restraining is I'm not sure, is just minimum temporal solution. It is not good at all in the long term. It's almost like a restraining and a repressing. It's not that much big different in the emotional level. So in a practice of a patient related with the anger, fundamentally with awareness. Awareness is basically, in the Shantideva's, mainly in this text, he's the patient with the awareness, what he wants to promote, what he wants to kind of give in guidelines. patient with the awareness. Patient with the awareness, basically, that means, it basically, when you see that action, your awareness scans not just that action, your awareness scans whole existence of that person's. Even that can have two layers. Conventionally, today's way of looking at it goes through like, okay, childhood and in all that kind of story you're building together, and then you're trying to see that person. Okay, I understand. I understand why you are so easily fall apart. I understood. It doesn't take anything personal. Basically, patient with the awareness will basically have the perfect armor. Basically, that person will basically, due to that awareness, will take nothing personal. Nothing personal. When it becomes a personal, although why it's a personal, when it becomes personal, somehow ego is not able to tolerate that. Patient with the awareness, you still have the ego, but ego is somehow, that's okay. Ego can kind of like, not that much involvement. Without awareness, everything becomes personal. That's kind of like a threat for ego. That's threat for ego. So awareness is somehow in a protection. It's basically that kind of negative action will not become take as a personal threat or personal hate or nothing. So awareness, patient with the awareness, that's the kind of like the Shantideva fundamentally promoting. Patient with awareness. But fundamentally what we're trying to say is like basically you're not just zoom into the action, you have the wide angle of the whole person existence. Not so much past, not so much in the future, even the present moment. See this person, see the action, and see the another layers also, not only what really comes down to. And basically, you have a compassion for that person, and you can have a lot of prayer and dedication for, to overcoming from the root problem, which is the affliction of that person's. So it is a really, really, like in a counseling, today's method maybe might go to past. Okay, that's also good when you're able to integrate that awareness. Okay, where this person coming from is a background issue. When you're aware, when that kind of like awareness becomes present while these actions you see, then I think the minute awareness involves, all these afflictions becomes a little bit more calmer. At least afflictions become more calmer. There doesn't become outrage. Awareness kind of helps to kind of calm down, easy to kind of manage. So Shantideva over here, the patient, basically lots of awareness. Basically, it is basically, thank you. Basically, it's trying to, one thing as a human awareness, I think is interesting. That our human awareness is so interested in the specific things. Specific. And we are, if we can zoom in and out, then I think it's a good, not all the time zoom in, not all the time kind of specific. Again, if I use the word awareness regulation is not just only zoom in to the object, but also zoom out from the object. You have the wide angle, and you have also kind of like a close-up angle. You're having that kind of like a awareness regulation. I don't know why I'm saying regulation word too much today. Now, for example, I think it must be good training. I think like if we have a training in a kind of like a basic exercise of our awareness, if we say like we have a physical exercise, yes, what will be our awareness exercise? Our awareness exercise. We have a breathing exercise. Every morning we want to get up and we have a specific kind of strengthening. Strengthening our physical, we have a physical exercise. What will be our exercise for awareness? We might say maybe the compassion, loving kindness. I think they become like more specific issues. Exercise should be much more general, in the general health. So awareness exercise, maybe we should have that kind of like somehow intentionally our awareness to kind of like having two aspects, close up. This is all the exercise is contraction and expansion. Is our exercise is basically where we are our existence in the physical level, kind of like a tightening up and releasing. And same way with the cognitive exercise. Maybe we should have that kind of like a closing up, expansion. General, whatever we see, it don't have to be object of compassion. It don't have to be something emptiness or reality. Just whatever reality it is, if we can exercise. 7 times, 21 times, that kind of like just general awareness, just able to expand and contract, close up and expansion. I think this can be really good because usually we are just kind of like stuck in one place, and we don't have to kind of like way to opening up. So basically, ultimate practice of a patient is a patient with awareness. Awareness is just expansion of that object when you see. Whenever you counter that kind of any situation, somehow able to zoom out, able to see the holistic. We are not able to do that. If we're able to do that, patient with awareness. It's not imposed. It don't have to do nothing. It don't have to do the regulation. It don't have to be the ethic. It is a very humanistic patient. You connect human to human. Awareness. And then basically, there's a lots of these, this prison project, the documentary, that later the family trying to forgive that story. Mm-hmm. There's this, I think this prison have killed some family member, but then later, slowly they really wants to know better that person who did it. And they have a more understanding, they're able to really genuinely forgive this person and really trying to help not only him, but lots of people who are going through that. Because of the only thing able to forgive, because now the loved ones able to learn more about that person. So awareness is, I think, is a really, basically, somehow luckily, is able to open up, able to zoom out the cognitive awareness. So this is like a patient with awareness. What I'm saying is a fundamental practice of a patient dealing with anger. Now, I think let me put this away. If there is an anger, something specific towards to your own self, and there is an anger specific towards to another living being. We can have this kind of two things. When we're dealing anger with another living being, something that's, kind of like a challenging for yourself, and for these kind of things, not necessarily ignoring specific actions, but cultivating more awareness around that person will become a fundamental way of a practice of a patient. Now, related with the anger towards our own self, what happens now is the practice of a patient was that, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes related with our own self, not necessarily you have to do this kind of like a developing awareness. I will say fundamentally first thing, feeding that trying to stop to feeding, not necessarily trying to developing some level of awareness. I think that's what I'm thinking. You know, it can be different to different people. Self-hatred, self-anger is a confused anger. It's not that much, I feel not that much to invest awareness, the fundamentally fasting. Kind of reducing to feeding that awareness. That kind of like a thoughts. I think and just basically observing a little bit, mindfulness, observing the behavior, and through that you pause to feeding that thought. Simply, I think it will kind of dissolves that kind of like a self-anger. I think that awareness, sometimes I feel maybe more when you put more awareness into that one, I'm not sure. At the beginning, maybe it can be difficult. You know, it may end up more into self-judgmental, and maybe some people can be different, but I think that for self-anger and hatred, just pausing and fasting. And if there's something related with another living being, practice observation, awareness. Applying awareness becomes a fundamental way to dismantling that anger. And we will use word patient, but the patient is just in the front, but actually majority transforms into the compassion. Majority of, through the awareness, you kind of, patient is basically through that awareness, you are not focusing and you're not giving attention to that action specific. And that's it, patient. And rest of the awareness, the follow, the compassion, is you have more connection. You're really you really will connect it more better. You connect it much more deep. Okay? So that's, I think, the one way of doing. And and based on that, if we take much more into practice or meditation practice or visualizations, blessings from the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And that's, I think you have to put later part, because sometimes what we do is the minute we have this kind of, then we bring the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and visualizations, and we haven't done the first basic work. I think that's a little bit not appropriate. We bring Buddhas and Bodhisattva part of the things once we did the basic work. Apply awareness, apply fasting our own emotions, not feeding this. We did our own basic practice. Then we deserve to invoking Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and visualizations. And all the kind of that will become more dessert. That's more like we deserve. We deserve because we did the basic requirement that what we have to do it. And based on this kind of things, and then you having this kind of visualizations of the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and receiving blessings and purifying aggressions of your own self and another living being. And imagination and visualization of these things. Are they important? Yes. They're very, and these visualization based on your own faith and conviction for Buddhas and Bodhisattva, they becomes, you take your basic work into much more profound level once you did that in a later. How is a profound level? Basically, the basic work what we've done is your own Dharma jewel. Your own Dharma jewel. Now you had your Dharma jewel. Based on your own Dharma jewel, then you did rest of the visualization and prayer and everything. It was a thorough and perfect. Okay, it's a perfect and it's thorough. If you do another way, you have this kind of rage and suddenly you went to visualizations and prayers and things like that. It's better than nothing, but I'm not sure it will can get anywhere that much. Okay, so I think it's a very important, our own basic awareness and basic practice. And that basic awareness and practice concluded with the practice of a visualization, prayer. It becomes a subconscious level and a karmic level. I think these are very powerful. And visualization becomes real. Visualization becomes real. It's not just daydreaming, not just imaginating, because you are really connecting. Your awareness becomes the source of your visualizations. You're not just kind of suddenly just pulling out your visualizations. You have a really good groundwork to create that kind of like a inspiration. And you have that faith, groundwork you've done already, awareness is real, and your feelings are real, and visualizations are real. Everything becomes real. Otherwise it becomes a daydream. So then, and okay, once you're doing that, what really helps is karmically and emotionally re-strengthening. This practice of visualizations and recitations are some kind of like a re-strengthening karmically and emotionally those positive emotions and positive thoughts. Is re-strengthening. And that kind of re-strengthening becomes fundamental foundation for, it's just kind of like a cycles or circles. Okay. Not so tsugi gombaches. So Shantideva mentioned you should meditate from the many different perspectives, the practice of a patient. Many different perspectives is basically, it's not there's a different type, this type, that type, that type. Generally, there's three types of patients. But here, what he means is implementing awareness. And that awareness comes through many different karmic reality of yourself and that person. And that awareness can become a primordial to practice of a patient. Okay? So, Naso Tsuju Gombacha, through variety methods, is not so much many different type in it. I don't think so. It's not so much different. It's not talking about so many different types of a patient, but the different foundation of awareness creates this kind of like a practice of a patient. Okay. Now these are, I think we need to take step by step. What I'm telling over here is anger or attachments is basically human emotional energy or push and pull. That's what I think. And when they become overly influenced by egotistical self-cherishing, then it becomes very narrow, and that becomes basically harming and disregarding and so on and so forth. So now transforming these kind of a feeling, human emotion, into different wisdom. Like a philosophical answer can be straightforward. Like if we ask, like, what is the basic requirement? If we use conventional terminology, what is the basic requirement to transform anger into the one of the wisdom? We'll say first thing, you have to realize emptiness. You need to realize emptiness. Emptiness of a particularly he or she person, emptiness of self. And that's then, yes, now you are into the zone where you can do, you're permitted. I still need to be trained. Still need to be trained. And again, when we're using this kind of terminology, transforming affliction into the wisdom. When we're talking when we're trying to discuss these kind of things, we have to work understanding of a human emotion and consciousness in the framework of a gross mind and the subtle mind. That's we have to keep in our mind. We cannot digest this kind of statements, transforming affliction into the wisdom, based on our awareness background is just kind of gross mind. No, we have to have that whole framework, and then we need to kind of digest the affliction transforming into the wisdom. Okay. Now, why I'm saying you have to kind of take it such a statement based on awareness of a framework of human consciousness, have a layers, gross and subtle. And when we're talking transformation, it's not transformation into the gross level of human afflictions. It's just directly transforming into wisdom. There's not possibility. Basically, our grossest human consciousness somehow gradually dissolve into the subtle or subconscious or whatever we're going to call it. And once we have that kind of like in and out access as a human being, as a practitioner, then yes, now you are in a whole different way of experiencing your human consciousness. And yes, you can say impossible things are possible. Affliction transforming into the wisdom. So it is very important to framework how such a statement we understand. And then we can really accept the possibilities. But right now when we're trying to listening and understanding, just framework about the mind that we know, the mind that we experience. And that's have a very much difficult way to seeing transforming into the wisdom. One of wisdom. So the minute we have a discussion, these things happen, we have to kind of like a kind of like a settling the awareness of a consciousness. So basically, fundamentally, like when you have integrated some level of a medicine to the poison, and that kind of based on a specific awareness, then you can transform that poison into some kind of medicine. It's basically affliction transforming into wisdom is we need to understand what are the conditions, where it can, kind of, instead of, if you leave it by itself, it is a threat for life, but once it's kind of like integrated with the different conditions, it becomes saving the life. That's kind of like we can know that in okay, so yes, so it's one is what's it? Virtue distraction. You say you never heard that. Which one? Can you say that again? Calm abiding is a virtue distraction. Well, I think I say that breathing meditation, when you're doing breathing meditation, you're bringing your attention to your breath. As some kind of calm abiding, we can say it, and I say yes, yes, I'll still keep it that statement as a virtue distraction. I'll stand with that statement. Breathing, mindfulness with the breathing is a virtue distraction. Basically the background is something like that. In the Buddhist philosophy, the relation between the breath and the human awareness is the breath is like the horse. And consciousness is the jagger who ride the horse. What do you call it? Jockey. Yeah, jockey. It's the consciousness is like the jockey. Our breath is like the basically horse and the rider of the horse. Okay, so it's kind of common sense. If you want to control the horse rider, you just control the horse. Maybe the horse rider is a little bit more difficult to reach. The horse is close to reach. So by whatever you can reach closer, you can somehow temporarily, you can control the rider also by just controlling the horse. So meditation is somehow to gain some level of a ground into the consciousness and human. And the first thing what we did is, you cannot get directly because mind is so fast. There's no way to catch. Mind can go to Mars and come back now. It's traveling that fast. So we can, the horse, the breath, and almost what we're doing is that kind of like a breathing exercises. Fundamentally, in a way, meditation, when you say meditation, I think is you are training how to slow down. When you're doing meditation, what you're really doing is almost you have to visualize, like there's this train, speed train, going like 300 miles per hour. TGV, in France there's a TGV is going. So meditation is something like your consciousness, your mind is going this kind of speed. And the meditation practice is basically trying to stop that train of a mind. And is having lots of collusion but still going. Meditation practice, you're just basically trying to break, slowing down. It's just basically so
is there a way to bring this kind of practice into dreams? Like sleeping at night.
Mm-hmm.
I, like a few days ago, I was like wondering, because like we waste like basically half life like sleeping and kind of other half like working and kind of distracted. So
yeah, again, one thing that we have a little bit access into the subconscious, one of a part of our routine. Right now we're just kind of like exhausted and falling asleep. Or we can do some kind of like an intentional sleep. Intentional sleep basically means, basically what, if we can, the sleep state of awareness somehow due to slowing down our sense awareness, that things, gives a little bit kind of space of a good quality of a concentration by nature. So somehow the focus in a state of a sleep or dream, whatever, that level of awareness have some kind of naturally quality of a concentration there. So sometimes practitioners are trying to access that, intentionally, because it have a naturally gifted of a quality of a concentration. Sometimes dream have a very strong, things happens in a dream or things happen, it's because it's so become real and it's about basically quality of a concentration. The action that you dream is the process. What's happening is a very full pay attention into the state of a dreaming, what's happening. So fundamentally, you have a quality of a concentration into that. And that's really the practitioners, okay, let's try to make access and able to do that, because quality of a concentration makes a much more stronger impact into the progression, into the path. So okay. Now, when you look into the Shantidevas in the 6th chapter, verse number 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, these verses are also very important to reflect it, because even when I say like a fasting or your thoughts, from the, if not feeding and fasting, it requires some level of a contemplation. Otherwise, even our physical fasting, it requires some level of education and understanding and contemplation. So therefore, basically, disadvantage, not we understand disadvantage of anger. We understand that anger is painful and all that's not healthy. But what we are liking is that we are not able to apply that understanding into the contemplation, wisdom of a contemplation. Wisdom of a contemplation, I think, which really gives you the foundation to engage. Wisdom of understanding is just kind of information. You have the information. You understood that information. You will apply that information, not necessarily, just in a wisdom of understanding. Wisdom of a contemplation, you have information, you understood the information. Once you apply that information into the wisdom of a contemplation, wisdom of a contemplation, basically, that information integrating with the self a little bit, is bringing much more closer to yourself. And wisdom of a contemplation have a sincere, wisdom of understanding is a complex, complicated, vast, so many things there. Wisdom of a contemplation is very simple, and it stick with that simplicity really can make a difference. It becomes much more into your heart. So verse number 2nd, 3rd, 4th is much more to how to develop wisdom of a contemplation. A little bit more simple. It's not trying to digest entire information that you have, but you take one information and you're trying to contemplate it. It's much more kind of like more trying to create that commitment towards to change through wisdom of a contemplation. Wisdom of understanding and information, not necessarily. This is where we have to start. Okay. Okay, let's take a break here. All that have negative conditions to purify, and all the conducive conditions to come together, and also receiving the blessings of Tara. And of course, also we'll include in part of this prayer all our lineage teachers to have a healthy and a long life. And our own self also have to flourish and to be able to continue our practice, spiritual practice. Okay, so that's kind of like the intention of this recitation of a Tara prayer. Okay, so I will recite in Tibetan. If you know how to recite, you can recite whatever language you're reciting, but otherwise keep your kind of emotional, spiritual connection with the Mother Tara, which is the manifestation of all enlightened beings, enlightened activity. Okay. Boda lai nejone damyi jangu le rungshin heba megi ulagin tusumsangi etile ma drama koji shesuso. Lada la meje bengi shabji bemo la dune pongba gune droze ma drama yumla cha zalo mje zema pama drama la cha zalo. Chanze drama ni mo paramo jeni geje lo dan drama jine sungwen chugi shegi kasa chawale ni juma. Chanze tengen dawa gundo kawang jani sibe she. Kama dongzha soba namgi rabdu chibe hora barama chanza sungwen chu niki pemenchane nambar gema jimba zunzhu kado shi wa soba samden chu ni chanzan di shinshi pezo dora tayin nambar gema chu ma mali paru chimba tobe gyawe siki shindu dema chanza duda rawu yigi dudan choda naga gama jiden dunbo shiki nende luba mela gubani ma chanza gyashi mela tsangba lungla na zong ju chu ma jimboro na jisa namdang nu jin so yi dine de ma changze zhejin sha nang be ye paru zhugo rabdo ju ma ye gyam yogon sha ginende memba choba shin do bara ma changze duri jiba chenpo du jibo nambar ju ma chu ye shen ne zhong ye denze rawo tamje ma lu sa ma changze gunjo sumzun sha ye seme duga nambar gen ma jimba zunju ka do shi wa soba samden chu ni ma Sumida Moluchu Jokolo gave a ranger Chanza Rabdo Gawaji, Ugen Waking Tamabama, Shabarashi to that Dudanji, they won't do Zema, Chanza, Sajingo and Sonam, Tamji, Governor Nima. Chong agency, Yiki Hongi Pongbadamja, number of drama, Chanza de Vedumbu, Gambadamji Shindubama, Rave Trana, Obama, Dabashindu, Razama, Chanza Kavetame, Medar Bavetunu in Anema. Yagan Yogan Korage, Dribuni number Joma, Chanza Sajimala Chaki, taking in Doma. Chong agency, Yiki Hongi, Rimba de Munam Nigama, Chanza, Dema Gamashima, Yang Edition Hima. So Hamda Yandan Dembe, Diwachimbo Chumanima, Chanza Kunakora, Gave, Dry Luni number Gima. 이게 주변 알고베 리봉을 로마니마 찬제 투리심네다베 홍기남베 사비니마 리라 벤달라 담베 지지데 숨나 예와니마 찬자사 예수인남베 리다 따지잖아 나마 따라니지비 이게 돈나말리바네 세마 찬자 하이 손남게 볼하다 미엠지데 마고니 고자가 와지지 쏘다멜라니 바세마 찬자 니만다와 게베지니 볼라라사마 하라니지도 다라 신도 잡으리네 세마 찬자 디니 숨나 그베 시베도 다ян다데마 Dendang rola nujin sonum jumbadori rabjuni matsabanga gedovadida changzawa na nishu zaji. Hamo lagu yangdande melonde kangi rabdan jude sodang torang labarjini tembe miji tamji rabdir. Diba tamji rabdoshi wa ngenro tamji jomba nido gyawa chawa nadandi nyurdongone kowa gyula. Dile chawa nini tobje sanje koban tadu deru ti itoni dabu chimbu dene bam shenruwa. Soba tani tongwa nijan tembe rabdo sawa nido dunda rimdan duki sirwe. Dungen tsokde nambar bande simje shemba namla yango ninsum dundungo bar juna pudo bene pudo gyushin nordo bene nonum nidop deba tamje toba gyula gena mije soso jangyurchi jizun pama droma na choju tuzum shibayi gyawasa she tamje la kune tamye chagiwo medo dubu mame ten shesa romola somango shimyi jirune ba pabe sunum she soso toma mene tadeba mige judan semenga simni nimongo gyube diba tamje shabargi Nindo range changjun sumsusu jiwo la soba tusum gewaji saba sunam nani daira simgemji sambana lo yichira. Chijun temo deba yo chujo kolo kodo su kowa jisen mado ba nyanga menda duchi dongen jazo jimba simjenam naso dagi sunamji saba tamje changjun. Ringbo mido jowa yi drembe pedo daju ji jizun chumde nema tuji jin dadan taye simjen tamji dimni chanji sonyi nyuzo ne zobe sanje toba zedo so tema duchi sarab kundo yang tada mi dewa chodon. Tam지에 겐바 두바 제발라 바제 댕게린다 내라서 뒤미 지버 주바나서다 밀람년다 사마년바다 지바지서 녀발사바나 뉴도 시시메 바서도 지덴 레렌데 바에 다시 델레분 소바나 페이지 지베도 나말레 바 베메hen기 주바서도 주블라 순시 탐지 다도 지루전주 동안의 동인된 도장서 전부지 양원 다단 페이지 개버서 계획 인고 상시가 와는 뼈만다 마진도 줄레지 나와다 얘기해 무슨 농된 방향다 이게 되도 다기 서름군의 주벨라 두숨산제 군지들면 원장시 주인이만 이제 의원남에 다시셔 개연좀만 교구 진짜다 코동 곳에서 다진나 기기 선조 선부 진짜와 된다 권한도 수주버 켜라 되진 소와 다베도 다소 강도 내배서 주도 내다오 탑수시바다 최단 자시 배워 제도서 Now, if there's any loved ones need to have a healing or some kind of a health issues, and right now I'm going to do some Madison Buddha mantra recitation, dedicating for any your loved ones facing some kind of medical health issues, keeping your prayer and visualize it in your heart and receiving blessing of Madison Buddha, and dedicate your prayer for their quick healing and so on and so forth, okay? 투지 군란년 몇점인데 천섬 대변인도 농에서 독숨내서 산재명계가 변조예요. 알아 자서로 투지 군란년 몇점인데 천섬 대변인도 농에서 독숨내서 산재명계가 변조예요. 투지 군란년 몇점인데 또 천섬 대변인도 농에서 독숨내서 산재명계가 변조예요. 알아 자서로 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 다단 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 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 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 다단 백에서 마백에서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 다단 백에서 마백에서 섬거 돼서 나는 백에서 마백에서 런서 섬거 돼서 겨와디 녀도다 상계 멜로 죽주네 좋아지 점을 버티 살아고 거저 파마심진 탐지 대단 된주지 년도 탐지 따도 전주 선박하나 소주와 대다군지 내면 두주지 심제 내봐 친이번 여도 내는 주변에는 따도 중화 매버쇼. So now we'll do Vajrasattva, basically entire inner life to flourish all your activities and all the negative conditions to purify fundamentally depends into the karmic purification. So at this moment we'll do Vajrasattva. You can visualize Vajrasattva in your crown and also crowns of your loved ones who need a karmic purification, and through this you can expand also for all sentient beings. And we'll do Vajrasattva. While we're doing Vajrasattva mantra recitation, during that time cultivate your sincere devotion towards the Guru Vajrasattva, and also sincere connection kind of regenerate towards to your loved ones who need a karmic purification, which is a foundation for all the spiritual healing or emotional healings. And while we're reciting the Vajrasattva mantra, visualize the blessings and the things kind of like and while you're visualizing these blessings receiving, also dedicate all your merits to karmic purifications of your loved ones and all sentient beings. Kangi Tsenzam Jube Jang Lenge de Maluba, Gijin Yellow Tunjube Doji Sambala Jazia, Kangi Tsenzam Jube Jang Lenge de Maluba, Gijin Yellow Tunjube Doji Sambala, Kangi Tsenzam Jube Jang Lenge de Maluba, Gijin Yellow Tunjube Doji Sambala Cha Tsel, Mezas Dosamaya Malabala, and Body Anurado Meva was the Meva and the Saga Masum Savata This is my Malabalay This is my Malabalay Yedo me was Vajama, Anordam, was the Mavans, so was this is my Malabalay, was Vajama, Sujama, Anordam, was the Mavans, so was this is my Malabalay, was Vajama, Sujama, Anordam, was the Mavans, so this is my Malabalay, was Vajama, then Zaza was my Malabalay, was Vajama, was this is my Malabalay, was Vajama, so that this is my Malabalay, was Masama Yasado Home Kangi Sense of Jibejan ended them. Kijinilla Dunjime Doji Zambala Jose Kangi Sense of Jibejan ended them. Kijinilla Doji Zambala Jats Gawadi and you do the Doji Samba Dujin Duwaji.
디살라 거버주 전주섬 조림보제 마제반음 게주지 개반냠바 메바야 고네고노 파마섬 제담제 대단한 유진인로 담제다도 도마나 전주섬 바하나 다군이만 잠베 바위 지다르게 바도군도 성보대야 대신데 대다군지 지서달로 개와디다 담제 뒤숨 셰베 개와 담제된 거와가 나주든가 바디 다기 개회사와 되고 이제 상보 쥐쥐라도 뭐기 개와군도 연달라마도 제메치 사단 남기 연대라존에 돌지 장기 고반요도 쇼 Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.